I'll leave it that way. Ugh.
Well, then you won't hear us.
Yeah, no, I'll hear you. I hear you.
I thought you said for sure, I don't want to hear you anyway.
Come to think of it, yeah. Come to think of it.
Now that you mention it,
Now that you mention it.
Turn the volume way down on Kevin. We don't want to hear him anyway.
Hey, I'm Stephen Woodford of Rationality Rose, and I took a left at the Valley.
I know we shouldn't have to scream that we're atheists. We don't have non-astrologers and all that. But with the religious people taking over the world, we can either speak up or be pushed into a corner.
I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance and you just call it faith in unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed. I'm an atheist.
Coming at you from Puritan, BC, this is Left of the Valley. My name is Kevin, and I asked my girlfriend why she doesn't tell me when she has an orgasm. She says she didn't want to disturb me when I'm at work.
Oh my gosh.
Joining me as usual is the team which won't use a big word when a singularly unloquacious and diminutive linguistic expression will satisfactorily accomplish a contemporary necessity.
Exactly.
There you go. That was like $10 worth of words right there.
And never do it again.
We know she's getting better at golf because she hits fewer spectators, Nancy.
Not intentionally. It's just my aim is not that good.
Really, it's the people who are side-eyeing her.
She'll tell you to remember that today is the tomorrow you worried about yesterday, Christina.
I'm very deep and intellectual like that.
Absolutely. And she's so clever, even she doesn't understand a single word she says. Kirsten.
Pretty much, that's how I run things.
Ladies, welcome back. Hope you had a great week in the rain.
Oh my gosh, the rain has been magical.
We did have a good day. I think it was Wednesday.
No. Rain is beautiful. Good days are rainy days.
Rain love over there. So today we'll be talking to two ladies of a podcast called Forsaking Faith.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, so I'm going to be swimming in a sea of estrogen today.
Yes. And you'll enjoy it.
Yes, it can only do you good.
And that'll be for the second half of the show. But first, let's do a chit-chat. In the news today, did you guys hear about this? You guys remember this band, Pussy Riot?
Yes, in Russia.
Yeah. One of the members of Pussy Riot is actually in a hospital. And he's suspected of being poisoned. This is Pyotr
he's in Russia.
Yes. Pyotr Vizilin, I think. I'm sorry if I massacred the name there. He was arrested for disturbing the World Cup match. They were protesting too much Russian police state activism. The police state in Russia is much more strong than it is up here. And all of a sudden, he ends up in the hospital, and he's highly suspected of being poisoned.
Well, that seems to be the Russian.
Yeah, that seems to be the Russian way.
Deal with dissidents.
Yeah, so it's interesting to keep an eye on that. It seems that any political dissent will get you poisoned in Russia.
Yeah. If not right out killed.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully he can actually make a steady recovery. But so far the odds are against him.
If you were a political person and you were invited to have dinner with Putin, would you?
Well, I don't think you need to be invited to dinner. I think they can kind of
or dinner with
do it.
Anybody from the KGB.
I might bring my own lunch.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Well, then again, I'm not fighting against Putin. I might not have a reason to worry about. Did you guys hear that filmmaker Michael Moore, the controversial documentary maker, says he might actually have to escape to Canada? He's released his movie yesterday called Fahrenheit 11/9. Remember Fahrenheit 9/11? It hit the theater yesterday, and the film wavers between optimism at the populist movement from the left and the authoritarian regime of Donald Trump. It's a very anti-Donald Trump movie, and he says depending on the way it's received, he might actually seriously consider moving to Canada.
I don't know how serious he is. I think he's pretty entrenched in Flint, and I think that makes him a man of the people. I think if he was even half serious about coming up here, I don't think his movies would be as powerful because he's left, unless he, maybe had a little getaway. cottage up here.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, he
that'd be
does have
all
some
right.
family up here. Huh?
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because, now that under the Trump regime, essentially reporters are being arrested and stuff like that, right? Things that really didn't used to happen. So, yeah, he would totally be a target for Donald Trump. Speaking of the Mango Mussolini, that's my new nickname for Donald Trump.
I love it.
Did you guys hear the one about this week where he told Spain that they should build a wall in the Sahara Desert? No!
Wait,
Yeah.
Yeah, to manage
What?
migration. The Sahara Desert.
is he really that stupid?
He is really that stupid. The Sahara Desert. We're talking about 3,000 miles going east to west, and he thinks you should just build a wall?
Also, it's kind of hard for people to come across the Sahara Desert. It's
It's just
Yeah,
like,
he
what
was-
the hell are you
I mean,
thinking?
He was out to lunch when they had geography.
Oh, God.
And history and spelling.
Oh, my
and
God.
When is he
civility.
not out to lunch?
Yeah, exactly. I think he's out to lunch.
He's out.
He's not out to lunch. He's out to golf.
I can't
exactly.
I can't believe, when I look at a Trump supporter, I said, this is your guy? Really? Build a wall across the Sahara
the
Desert?
issue
This is your
a
guy?
lot of Trump supporters don't know about the Sahara Desert either.
Yeah.
They're like, "What's that? A desert? Okay."
Oh, my God.
They don't realize that the sand dunes can get like freaking 300 feet tall.
And Trump apparently thought that the Sahara Desert had to be smaller than the Mexican border.
Oh my god!
This is how ridiculous of a man this guy is. And the media's barely talking about this.
No, facts are just an option
If this-
that other people use. He's totally within his own head, and anything outside of that is fake.
If this was done or said by a Canadian Prime Minister, the Queen of England would come over here and grab him by the ear and toss him in London Tower.
What's their heads?
I mean, this is so bloody fucking stupid. I can't believe this man. And this is the guy in charge of...
You know what? That just encapsulates it. You can't believe that
No,
man.
no.
That's the administration in one meme.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it really
Absolutely.
is.
It's interesting that he thinks all immigration issues can be solved by a big wall.
Yeah, exactly. You solve everything with a wall. Did you guys hear that apparently one of the writers of Sesame Street said that Bert and Ernie are actually a gay couple?
I
did
saw
hear
that.
this.
Yeah.
This was longtime writer Mark Saltzman. He's a Sesame Street writer. He says that, yes, Bert and Ernie are actually a gay couple, and he writes them up as being a gay couple. Now, Sesame Street came back and responded that they are puppets, they're best friends, and although they are male, they don't actually have a sexual orientation.
Well, they're puppets.
They are puppets.
I mean, they have parts and non-parts, and I think the non-parts. But that doesn't make any. Well, I don't know. It would
I wonder what
depend
Jim
on
Henson's
orientation and gender, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
Whether they have parts or not.
I'm disappointed in all this because, frankly, those are not the questions we should be pondering. There are much bigger questions that our society needs to wonder about. It's like, why does the count? Right? Is Oscar the Grouch homeless?
Yeah.
And why is Cookie Monster? Is he an addict? And of course, most pressing of all, what is the secret identity of Super Grover?
Exactly.
Do you guys want to something?
Did you watch Sesame Street when you were a kid?
I've never actually seen
Of
Sesame
course,
Street.
who hasn't watched Sesame Street?
I mean,
I've never actually seen Sesame Street.
were you a faithful watcher?
As a very young child, I used to watch Sesame Street, and I've actually learned my alphabet in English before I learned it in French.
Yeah.
And that was all because of Sesame Street.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
See,
my
I
kids
didn't have TV.
Yeah, my kids.
didn't watch Sesame Street.
We watched Sesame Street together, and it was so charming.
Yes, absolutely.
It was just as much fun for adults to watch as
I had the Veggie Tales.
Yeah. No,
Oh, you poor thing.
No, I had Dragon Tales.
Okay, Dragon Tales was the best.
yeah.
Yeah, you guys are from a
was.
younger generation.
And Crazy Quilt.
I never had that. I had Recess.
I only got that on
Recess.
special occasions because it was on at like 10 at night.
Really? We had Saturday morning cartoons.
Saturday morning cartoons were the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were the best. I had trouble getting up every day of the week
Except for Saturday morning.
But Saturday morning, I was up at 5
Yeah,
watching
yeah,
Saturday morning
Exactly.
cartoons.
Typical kid.
I don't know what it was. Last but certainly not least, remember we talked about the Doug Ford in Ontario making changes to the sex ed program? and trying to bring it back to the standards of 1998, and where there is no talk about the LGBT, there is no talk about gender identity, there's no talk about consent.
It's ridiculous.
Well, it sparked a student walkout in Ontario.
Good.
Yeah, and a lot of about a dozen high schools across the province. Actually, the students walked out, and although they were protesting on behalf of the elementary school kids that are not being taught absolutely anything either. So
awesome.
I've got a little 2-minute clip here from the CBC, which explains it pretty good. So let's listen in.
Don't go back to 98!
At this Toronto school, the outrage over changes to the province's sex ed curriculum spills onto the streets.
We do not!
Organized under the banner, "We the Students Do Not Consent," a reference to the fact that sexual consent is no longer being taught in class.
Students are not lazy. We're not going to sit back and watch our education be destroyed.
But these are high school students. The reversal to the old 1998 sex ed course affects elementary schools only. Still, these kids say they need to stand up for their younger friends.
Kids do need to learn about gender expression and gender identities and different kinds of families and all that, and it's really irresponsible to cut that out.
The walkout wasn't confined to Toronto. Dozens of high schools across the province emptied out in Oakville, Guelph, Kingston, Ottawa.
We want sex ed! We want sex ed! No ignorance, no hate! Don't go back to 98!
In all, dozens of schools, thousands of students. A sign of how important this issue is for many.
Like, the kids are protesting about this. It must be something important, because why would they care so much about it?
But for some, the fight is personal. They say an outdated sex ed curriculum that ignores consent and same-sex relationships can have serious consequences, spreading ignorance.
As a member of the LGBT community, when I come out to people, the response isn't always positive.
And leaving young people in the dark and unprepared for the world around them.
I did not fully understand what consent was. It hadn't been talked about when I was in grade 8, and I found it very, very helpful because I was sexually assaulted and I did not understand that it was not okay.
Their message to the Premier, governing for the people, means governing for young people too. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario's Minister of Education, Lisa Thompson, declined our request for an interview, but her office said they encourage every interested person in Ontario to participate in the province-wide education consultations, set to begin next week.
And that was the CBC.
Good for them.
Yeah, well, good on those kids for doing that.
No
for
kidding.
taking matters in their own hands. And you know, it's they're speaking up for the younger kids that can't speak, you know, because you can't have elementary school kids protesting like that. So good for them for doing that. And I just want to make a little detour here on this, because this ties into a lot of things that we've been doing here on the show, talking about SOGI 123 and all that. And I know there's a lot of parents out there that are concerned about SOGI 123, and they're saying we shouldn't be teaching kids in school or even elementary school kids about sexual orientation and stuff like that, saying they're too young. Some people are saying it's the parents' place to do that, not the school. I can understand these concerns, but they're misplaced. Because, first of all, let's face it, parents do a lousy job at explaining sex to kids. They really do. I mean, my sex talk was lousy. And can anybody say, really, they had a really good sex talk with their folks ever?
I mean, I'd say it's probably a little bit, for a lot of people, an awkward topic to talk about sex with your kid.
Absolutely. And I think, I suspect that this is exactly what's behind the reticence of people to accept a program like SOGI 123 or the sex ed curriculum in Ontario. It's not because it's bad for the kids. It's making them uncomfortable. They don't want little Timmy to come at home and say, "Hey, Mom, today we learned about sex this, sex that. What is this? What is that?" They don't want those questions coming at them.
Well, I think the other part of that is gender identity, because now you have a lot more parents when they have a child who has been born of one sex and decides when they're 6 or 7 that they're gender when they're born of one gender, and they really feel as though they're another gender. It makes it very difficult for that child socially if the classmates reject him or her because of the transition that they want to go through or they are going through. And so kids need to get an education in terms of what society is like today. Not 10 years ago, but today, when coming out is something that for a lot of people is much easier. And kids need to recognize that when they're playing with a child who doesn't want to use the girls' bathroom, wants to go to the boys' bathroom, they need to understand the compassion and the respect that goes along with having that child as a playmate. And I think that's part of what Doug Ford, it's sort of the mini-me of Trump. And I think Ford is saying, make Ontario retro again.
Exactly.
But he's so wrong, and it's going to be so harmful to kids and to the adults that they meet that may be transgender or whatever. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
I also feel that a lot of issues dealing with people who are afraid of LGBTQ people and people those people, I find a lot of it comes from ignorance.
It does.
A lot of it just comes from not understanding. You get so many people who are like, oh, well, you can't be a woman because you have this chromosome. It's dude, you know nothing about the chromosome if you think that XY and XX are the only options.
Yeah, exactly.
You just don't understand.
We talked about that with Dr. Veronica Drance several shows ago, right? And people need to understand. I understand, you want to protect your kids, and you're feeling awkward about having a sex talk with your kids, especially when they're very young. But let's put it this way: a lot of these same people would say, "We want to teach kids to shoot a gun, so they can be safe around weapons."
I don't think in Canada as much.
No, but it's the same thing, right? You want to be able to teach kids how to handle a gun, so when they do find a gun in the home or something like that, they don't accidentally shoot something. You want to give them the information. When you're denying these kids this kind of education, you're essentially saying, let's give them less information. You're not making them safer. You're making things more dangerous. The world is out there nonetheless. You want to pump as much information and as early as you can in your kid so they can be more prepared to face what's out there.
Well, yeah.
Now, giving your kids a sexual education is not going to transform them into something they're not already.
And that's, of course, culture guard. And
and that's exactly what the lies of culture guards are trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you that if you listen to Soji 123 in these programs, your kid's going to turn gay. No, you don't learn your sexuality, you discover it. If your kid happens to be gay, you might not exhibit it now, but he will later, no matter what you teach him. So it doesn't matter at that point. You might not, his sexual expression might not be happening right now at a young age, but if he turns out later on in several years from now that he's gay, no matter how much sex ed you throw at him, that's not going to make him straight. Or how much would you withdraw from him is not going to keep him straight either.
All it'll do will make him accept himself and not hate himself.
Exactly. It's like that gun thing. You want to teach the kids about gun safety so they can be safe around guns. You want to teach kids about sex ed so they can be safe in the sexual world when it happens out there.
When Veronica was part of our program and she was talking about sex education and so forth, she gave the best explanation in saying that you have to look at that that sexuality is on a spectrum. It's just like people have black hair, brown hair, blue eyes, green eyes. We're all human, and we all are part of the human experience, but some of us are not on the same page all of the time. And if you understand that it's a spectrum and we're human, it's much easier, I think, to explain and to accept that we're not all permanently one gender because we were born that way. There's a variety, it's human, live with it, deal with
Exactly.
it, and teach your children. It's as long as you're a responsible, ethical adult or person, that's what counts.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important things that these kids are protesting, and one of the girls talked about it in the clip, is by taking this education away from children, it leaves kids so open to abuse.
Yes,
that they
and vulnerable.
won't even understand what's happening.
She said it. She was sexually abused,
Yeah.
but she didn't understand she was sexually abused until she learned from it.
And growing up, my family sex was never talked about. We had no I never got this sex talk, and it was never talked about. And in my family, sexual abuse was so rampant. It was insane, and people none of the kids understood what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't understand that what was happening was wrong. And when the parents, when any the adults found out, they kind of were just pushed under the rug. It's not happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's no, you have to understand that no one is allowed to touch your body in sexual ways.
Do you want
no one?
Do you want your kids to learn from sex and it be a bit embarrassing to you now, or do you want them not to learn from it, and then when they do learn from it, it's from sources like porn?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Is that what you want for your kid to learn sex from? Because that's certainly where I learned it from.
Mommy, what's scapula?
Magazine and porn and stuff like that. And trust me, it ain't a great source.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway.
Or the other kids at school.
Yeah, exactly. The incredible amount of, if I can recall, when we used to talk sex amongst teenagers, the incredible misinformation that was out there is oh my god, to this day it's what the hell were we thinking? Is that really what you want? Just because you want to save face and you don't want to be embarrassed a bit?
Those were the days when librarians, and I don't think they still do this, but in my day and age, say from the 50s to the 70s, something like that, teachers would actually go through some of the art books in the library and put little black stickers over the nude paintings, so they'd cover up,
That's ridiculous.
they'd cover up, the nipples, and so the guys would go through the pictures. Why is that all covered? What message does that send? When you have your genitals and your breasts covered over with black tape because they're the naughty bits. That's what happens when you're not, and you don't have real education.
Yeah. And then you get the idea of that. Oh, something's wrong with me.
Exactly.
That this isn't I'm not okay. It's ridiculous.
And of course, nothing better than a nice, sexy librarian, right? Oh yeah, I've heard. Take off their glasses, naughty librarian. Love.
Kevin, we don't need to hear about your fantasies.
The internet is there for a reason. Use it.
Just not right now.
All right.
No, the Halloween show is coming up, so get your fantasies ready, Kevin.
All right, let's move on to our top 10. Nancy, you got a list for us?
Sure, I've got one. I got a Canadian one.
Yay!
Okay. Yeah.
So all American listeners,
we need.
I'm joking. Learn about Canada, guys.
Yeah,
Good.
this is from Global News, which we all know is a really good source. So there's no 1 to 10. These are 10 Canadians that, let's see how many of them you guys know. I think you're going to know all of them. And it's a good way for our U.S. listeners to learn about some of the important people that we have up here.
Oh, Bob's got to be there, right?
Yeah.
How about Tim Hortons?
Bob from Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
Tim Hortons?
So this is the top 10 list of Canadians?
Yeah, this is Canadians.
Okay.
All right.
Top 10 Canadians.
Okay, first on the list, Terry Fox.
Of course.
Everybody, now in the U.S., Terry Fox was born in Winnipeg in 1958 and was diagnosed with bone cancer at 18 and had his leg amputated. But it did stop him from starting a Marathon of Hope, which was a cross-country journey to raise money for cancer research. And he was determined, and he was a strong guy, and went 143 days, which was 3,000, a little over 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers. And unfortunately, he died when he reached New Westminster here in BC. But his courage started an annual Terry Fox run, which I think was last week.
Well,
and
yeah, it
all
was.
through Canada.
Didn't Terry start from he died?
Well, you know more about.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah, and he was a national hero because of it, has always been a national hero since that time. And over $650 million has been raised in his name. There was a little boy, I think, close to us in one of our towns close by, who had just overcome his cancer treatments and participated last week. And so it encourages a lot of people who do have, some drawbacks to go ahead.
At the time, Terry
show what they
Fox.
can do.
At the time, Terry Fox was hoping to raise, I think it was just like $1 million. He thought, or was it like $1 per Canadian or something like that? That's what he wanted to raise, and that was in the 80s, obviously, which was, of course, a lot of money back then. But
yeah,
he did so much more.
Yeah, he received the Order of Canada, and actually, the Terry Fox run is in over 28 countries at this point. Yeah, I didn't realize that was true.
I love the Terry Fox run. It was one of my favorite days of school.
And he had the nice curly hair. He almost looked like a Greek god when you look at him. He really did.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that he's missing one leg.
Yeah, he really is. I guess he'd be almost at the top of the list. And favorite.
He was almost there was a show, the best Canadian. He was almost he was the runner-up.
Yeah, right. Anybody in our little group recognize the name Viola Desmond?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I'm not. It rings a bell. I couldn't
Viola
tell
Desmond
you
is known as the Rosa Parks of Canada.
She's the first Canadian woman to appear on our currency.
That's right.
She was a pioneer of black rights in Nova Scotia. She went. How this all happened was in 1946. She went to a movie, and after purchasing her ticket, she sat any place she wanted to sit, whatever seat she had, and a manager told her that seating area was for white patrons only.
That was in Halifax.
But we have had that kind of discrimination.
Yeah, we did. That was in Halifax.
Yeah.
At the time, she was willing to pay the extra because it was kind of like the VIP section. She was willing to pay extra, and they said, no, you got to move anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She fought the changes and was eventually pardoned because she was charged. She was pardoned in 2010, which was 45 years after she died, but better late than never.
Her sister is still alive and received the honors.
Oh, okay.
We talked about this on the show way back.
Yeah, so have you seen any of the $10 bills?
No, I have not.
I haven't seen any.
I think they're supposed to come out this year.
Yeah, but I think, for Canada, considering our neighbor to the south,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we like different kinds of things on our
I definitely think having her on the currency will make a lot of young, because I had no idea about her. So it'll hopefully make a lot of younger people like, who is this person? And then look into our history and realize that we have had shitty times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Canadian history is pretty fascinating, but we don't teach it well. We only teach about fur trade and beaver pelts. And, And there's way more to that, to Canadian history, than just that.
Though I think it's improved because when I was learning Canadian history, I learned about the residential schools. And
it is improving.
The shit we did to Native, the Aboriginal people. So I did learn all about that, which was really good.
Okay, everybody should recognize this one on either side of the border, Gord Downie.
Gord Downie?
Gord Downie.
Who?
Come on, guys. Gord Downie. Tragically hip.
Oh, of course.
It's like,
start with the band name.
Gord Downie, Tragically Hip. And he also worked hard to promote Indigenous rights, and he was the front man of the Tragically Hip.
Just passed away this year.
And he fought terminal brain cancer the last years, and so he announced he was going to go on a cross-country tour, which he did, and he died October 17th, 2017 in Toronto. But he said, one of the news reporters said that the outpouring of support and grief for Downie was unprecedented, and that kind of shared cultural experience that doesn't happen often. So
you said he died October 17th?
Pardon?
You said he died October 17th?
Yeah.
Isn't that coincidence? 1 year later, legalized marijuana. Coincidence? I think not.
It's a celebration of his death. Or the morning of his death.
Yeah.
So get stoned.
When he had that final tour, and he went to Kingston, Ontario, it was watched. People who were there and who watched it, 4 million people gathered. So those of you from the South, put on those CDs and videos watching the Tragically Hip, and you'll see why he's so beloved up here. He had a First Nations. One of the albums that he had was called "The Secret Path," which had to do with the indigenous people. So, at any rate, okay, here we go. Now, we may not be really familiar with this lady whose name is Nellie McClone, and she won Manitoba. We need to know her, especially for the, for all the women. She won Manitoba, which is one of our provinces, women, the right to vote in 1916, which was the first province to allow women to vote.
Wow, good job.
Good job. She was a writer, teacher, wife, and mother of 5. So she really worked hard for women's rights and had her own family at all. She had a really good history. She became a member of the legislature in Alberta, and with women's marches so prevalent nowadays, bringing women to Washington and all over, women's rights are always in the spotlight. So you kind of have to give a salute to Nellie. Because it's 102 years since she gave women the right to vote. Yeah. That's a good, for Canada, that's great. That really is. From 1916. Okay, here's one that I doubt whether the people from the South are going to know. Lester B. Pearson, the only Canadian to be our 14th Prime Minister from 1963 to 1968, but he was also the only Canadian to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And anybody have any recollection of?
There was a spat between Lester B. Pearson and Johnson in the U.S. Johnson was not very fond of Pearson, and apparently there was an incident where I can't remember what Lester B. Pearson said, but he obviously said something that Johnson didn't like, and apparently in the White House, Johnson grabbed him by the scruff, if you wish, and basically said, "You don't come to your neighbors and piss on the carpet."
I never heard that story.
Yeah, apparently it's a very interesting story, because Johnson. Wow. Johnson was not the kind of guy to,
Great story.
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing to see a Canadian Prime Minister and an American President kind of going, okay.
Oh, wow.
This is almost going to get physical, so.
That's for sure. Well, he won, getting back to the Nobel Prize, he won it for his efforts in bringing France and England out of Egypt during the Suez Crisis in 1956 when he was Minister of External Affairs. Good job,
dude.
So I gather Johnson wasn't too thrilled, wasn't too impressed. Nobel Peace Prize winner or not.
Yeah, exactly.
And that definitely cements our world reputation of peacemakers.
Yeah. He comes up every now and then. Chrystia Freeland, who is in the midst of our trade talks, uses him as an example in several of her speeches when she talks about Canada's foreign policy priorities. Okay, here's one. I'm going to tell you what he did and then see if you can remember his name. I'm kind of giving a shout out to Kevin because of his pop quizzes here. Okay, a Nobel Prize winner in Canada in medicine for his work.
Bethune. Bethune.
Banting.
What?
Banting. Frederick Banting.
No, that's not the same one I was thinking.
Yeah, creating insulin.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
The Iditarod.
Yeah. I mean, he was born in 1891.
Balto!
Pardon?
I said Balto!
Okay.
Sorry, the movie.
She loves that movie.
Yeah, so Banting was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1923. This is an interesting story. His research assistant was a doctor who was Dr. McLeod, and he helped Banting by providing facilities for his research. And when Banting was given or notified that he won the Nobel Prize, he said, "I'm not taking this prize unless you include him."
That's so awesome.
How often do you hear that? So the committee said, no, this award is for you, and so they gave him the award. So Banting did the next best thing. He shared the money
Oh,
with
okay.
his.
That's awesome.
Is that a nice guy
Yeah,
or what?
yeah.
I can't remember hearing any of those. That kind of a great story. That's so Canadian.
There's one other I can think of that did the same thing, but it was Pierre Curie. when he shared with his wife.
Yep.
Oh,
Because
that's
the Nobel
right.
Prize was given to
That's
him, and
right.
he said, "I'm not accepting this unless she's included as well."
Yeah. Well,
Thank
'cause she
goodness
was,
for your
she was
historical
so
memory. That's exactly
pivotal
right.
and important in the research as well.
Oh, she was vital. It was absolutely vital.
Yeah. Anybody hear of Marshall McLuhan?
No.
Who was a communication theorist and credited for coining the term "the medium is the message." He was he was a scholar, and he was born in Edmonton in 1911, and he described the effects of the internet and virtual reality in 1964, saying that the global village would not be a peaceful place. The interesting thing about
Twitter.
Did anybody see Annie Hall, Woody Allen's movie? He's standing in line and he's having a discussion. This is in the movie, and he's having a discussion with another fellow in line about Marshall McLuhan, and he says, "Well, I'm going to have Dr. McLuhan talk to you himself." And so Marshall McLuhan was actually in Annie Hall when you see that little clip. So that's kind of fun, that he took time out to be in Annie Hall. One of the interesting things that Global News did, in including different people on this list, was they included all Indigenous artists. I think that's so Canadian.
Yeah.
That's so Canadian. And so there were so many Canadian artists that were Indigenous, they decided, let's just give the, say that they're all iconic.
Yeah.
And now that there's a renewed focus on cultural appropriation, Indigenous artists are speaking up for their rights and for their work more and more. Clara Hughes. She was the only person in history to win medals at both Winter and Summer Olympic Games. Do we know Clara Hughes?
No idea.
She's been a spokesperson for mental health and an advocate. So she's a hero in a lot of ways, both for her accomplishments and for the fact of being very open about how she deals with her mental illness. Now, here we go. Back a little bit. This person was voted by Canadians as the greatest Canadian on the CBC in 2010, Tommy Douglas.
Tommy Douglas.
I saw a smile on your face.
Oh, yeah.
And he brought socialized medicine
That's right.
to Canada. Aha.
Suck that, America.
Yeah, he was born in Scotland in 1904 and immigrated to Winnipeg when he was 15.
When Michael Douglas did his movie Sicko, and he talks about socialized medicine, he actually refers to that, and he says Canadians thought so highly of the guy who brought socialized medicine, they actually made him the most popular Canadian ever. So there's a lesson for maybe our neighbors to the south.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of it.
It's a very popular idea.
Yeah, he was premier of Saskatchewan, and he brought government-funded health care to the province and then prompted the federal government to follow suit. So there's our list for today. Is there any other Canadian that wasn't on this list that you'd put on there?
Tim Hortons.
Tim Hortons.
Yeah. Well,
I love Tim Hortons coffee, okay.
Wayne Gretzky while you're at it.
Yeah.
The great one. Oh, God.
Want to know what makes me really happy? There was only like one or two politicians in that list.
Yes.
And their accomplishments weren't their political things.
Career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like in America, there would be multiple politicians.
If not all.
I don't know about that. I'm not sure if I agree with that.
I don't know. If you look at a list of generally what they do in the States is when they make up a list, they generally categorize them.
I guess they do
the
have
top
a
10 in
few more
entertainment
people
or the top
than we do.
one in there. I'll have to take a look to see if there really is a list that lists the top 10 Americans.
Yeah, maybe we
regardless
could
of
do that
category.
next time. Top 10
I'll do that.
Americans. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. All right. Thank you, dear. That was great. All right. My dear Kirsten, you ready to regale us with other tales of nonsense?
Oh, yes.
It's another brilliant moment brought to you by religion.
All right. So I'm telling you guys this in confidence. You're not allowed to share this anywhere.
Oh,
it would make one anonymous Mormon church leader extremely upset.
Oh no!
And we cannot make Mormons upset.
So we can't broadcast this, is what you're saying?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay. Listeners, don't listen to this.
A man who was carrying a gun in his backpack may face charges after the firearm went off inside a meeting house for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Utah.
Which was cocked?
Jesus was cocked? What?
Like, did he not have the safety on?
Oh, no, it gets better. Just listen.
Jesus Christ.
Fortunately, no one was hurt, but there was one casualty. The feelings of the church leader who asked people not to tell anybody about the incident on social media.
He's an idiot. You never tell people to not tell people.
The moral of the whole story, literally. The gun belonged to a 74-year-old man, the Salt Lake Tribune reported. What? According to Lieutenant Brian Taylor, Provo police responded to a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints ward house at 345 Eastern Foothill Drive about 2 p.m. on Sunday. The man had a .22 caliber revolver in his backpack. He was in the vestibule at the entrance to the church when the gun went off and the bullet went through the adjoining wall where young women were meeting.
Jesus Christ.
See that?
Why?
Well, it's because
Why?
It's because God is so good in his miracles to protect his flock that they feel they need to bring a gun with themselves even at church.
No, there's a reason. The man had left his gun in his backpack following target shooting the previous day. And this gentleman, Eric Hawkins, also added, "We are confident that the building and its members are safe." Okay, why would you leave a gun like that in your backpack, loaded, and ready to fire?
And after target practice, you're supposed to go home, take all the bullets out, put them in separate locked containers.
No, not in the States. The States don't have that law.
I know, but it's not. I'm not meaning law. I mean just good practice.
Yeah.
No.
Well, at least leave it in the trunk of his car. What?
Or have a case or something.
Like a lockbox in your car.
But like a backpack? Really? The man does have a concealed carry permit. The case has been referred to the city attorney's office for possible charges. The incident probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal. After all, no one was struck by a bullet. And, it's America.
You'll have to try harder next time.
But it is now because a church leader put a taboo on talking about it. He instructed people not to share details on social media. So naturally, audio of him saying that exact thing ended up on Mormon Leaks.
Nancy, you carry around your Magnum 44. Do you bring it as well when you go to your satanic rituals?
Well, of course.
Okay. I just thought maybe it was kind of weird to bring a 22 to church.
No, I have a mini.
The modern sacrifice.
Oh, you have a mini?
I have a mini.
A mini Magnum, okay.
The Mormon Leaks website released an audio recording of the church leader encouraging the teenage girls in the ward or congregation not to talk about the incident publicly or post anything on social media. So it wasn't just like they were young women. They were teenage girls he was telling not to talk about it on social media.
Oh, that's the right group to say, so, don't say a word.
They went home on Instagram.
And Facebook, instantly...
And one of the girls looked at each other and said, "I call shotgun."
We'd rather not have you post, "Hey, a gun went off at church today." That will hit headline news and even go national, said the man. And then we've really created a situation that would be hard to control. So I'm asking you nicely to respect that. While Hawkins and the police indicated what happened was an accident, the unidentified leader says, "There have been some other threats against other individuals in a different ward that shares the building. So there's a particular level of precaution that the other ward has taken."
A 74-year-old man took a shot at me today.
The irony here is that if the Mormon leader wasn't trying to be so hush-hush about it, his words likely wouldn't have ended up online.
No, exactly.
But because the church has a habit of secrecy when it comes to damning information, someone had the instinct to record the audio and share it with the site that was bound to post it.
Nothing is private anymore. I mean, nothing. Everything is wired.
I have a feeling we have a budding atheist.
The smartphone changed everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a feeling we have a budding atheist in that church. Quick, record it.
Oh, Joseph Smith, protect us.
All right, I thought that was a good one.
That is a good one.
Moving on, this is somebody's response to having problems with churchgoers.
Oh.
In 2015, River Point Church bought space in Houston, Texas for a new branch. It also happened to be across the street from the Hiram Butler Gallery, an art vendor. That wasn't a problem on its own, but church members have frequently been parking in 4 spaces reserved specifically for the art gallery. No amount of discussion, Hiram Butler said, seemed to resolve the problem. I guess the church didn't realize you shouldn't get into an argument with an artist, because Butler commissioned some art that should solve the parking problem for good. A sign outside the Hiram Gallery reads, and let me explain before we get into this and before everyone freaks out, parking only for gay conversion therapy. We tried reason, we tried anger, neither of those things worked. So we're trying humor to see if that will reach them, said Butler. I'm as gay as a goose. It's not anti-gay. I've been a gay activist my entire adult life on the national life. It is satire. And just in case anyone thinks it is homophobic, there are also satirical bumper stickers telling people the conversion occurs in the other direction. For artist Robert Rosenberg, meanwhile, the sign and an accompanying line of pink bumper stickers, which read, "Follow me to the Blossom Gay Conversion Therapy Center, where we pray the straight away," should only be offensive to one contingent.
We pray the straight away.
I don't see how anyone who thinks very much can look at that sign and think it's offensive, other than people who belong in gay conversion therapy, who believe in gay conversion therapy and promote it, he said. It's supposed to be a visual assault on those people. Maybe they'll stop and think, oh yeah, that's our idea. It doesn't look so good in pink and black and 16 feet long.
Oh my god.
So it's not a small sign.
That kind of gives me an idea, actually. What they should do is, if you want to really put it to the conservatives there, they should paint a couple of parking stalls rainbow colored. Say for gay parking only.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
So none of these prude conservatives would even go near that. So you'd have all these parking stalls.
I think that's great. If you have a problem, let an artist solve it. The heck with diplomacy and military, force. Let an artist solve the problem.
And artists have a power, but they don't use their words necessarily for power.
Yeah.
So far, Butler says the sign hasn't completely solved the problem. He hopes, however, that he doesn't have to resort to calling a tow truck to take the cars away. For the church's part, Senior Pastor Patrick Kelly issued an apology to a local news station and said he would continue to be diligent to prevent our guests from using Mr. Butler's 4 parking spaces.
I think that's great.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Do you remember this? This is a while back. Remember the story where there was I think it was in Toronto, and there was like a gay church or a gay center or something like that, and somebody left a cross, a big cross, and they chained it up, and like a protest. And they took the cross and painted it all rainbow.
You know what's funny?
Cut the padlock and put their padlock on it.
My first thought was to that big cross was like, I would just go paint it rainbow colors.
It's exactly what they did, and that's the most brilliant way to respond to that bigotry.
That just validates what I said. You got a problem.
Use an artist.
Yeah,
use an artist.
Let an artist with a sense of humor.
On another point, though, you ever wondered why they have handicap spots in churches? Can't they just heal these people?
They just aren't praying hard enough. They obviously have something that they have to work through with God, because it's God wants to help them. It's them holding themselves.
God is so far behind in his work right now. It's scary. He needs an assistant. Thank you very much, ladies. So when we come back, we'll be talking to Heather and Christine of Forsaking Faith.
Looking forward to that.
So stay with us.
In a world torn apart by a lack of reason, or lease, and I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt, and I claim that right.
In the morning. Hi, everybody. This is Robert Stanley from the Right to Reason podcast. And if you subscribe now, you'll get free.
Learn more about the broadcast at therighttoreason.com.
What happens when you're an atheist living inside the Canadian Bible Belt? If you're like me, you gather some friends and take to the airwaves. So I invite you to take a left to the valley and find out where you stand in this world. Follow us on iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, Stitcher, Blog Talk, or lefttothevalley.com. Atheists, Skeptics, and Humanist Radio, no God required.
Whoever is led to believe that species are mutable will do good service by conscientiously expressing his conviction. For only thus can the load of prejudice by which this subject is overwhelmed be removed.
So what you know about natural selection? Go ahead and ask a question and see where the answer gets you. Try being passive-aggressive and try smashing heads in and see which...
Well, joining us online is a couple of ladies, Heather and Christine, of the podcast Forsaking Faith. They are snappy dressers and snazzy dancers. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us at Left of the Valley.
No problem. Thank you for having us.
You say that now, you might regret this in a couple of minutes.
Hey, we're wonderful. Everyone loves us.
Yes, we are, in our own special way. We're very wonderful.
Some of us are extra special.
That's aimed at me again. Ladies, you guys are making some headway with your podcast there, but you might not be as well known north of the 49. Would you be maybe so kind to give us a bio?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Heather. You do it. Okay. So Christine and I are 30-somethings who grew up in the somewhere in the state of New York, and we are childhood. Well, we talk about this in our podcast. We were friends from a very young age, but we weren't as close until maybe about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. We started becoming closer, and we have a very similar background. We went to the same church and the same Christian school and come from this fundamentalist background. So that's a little bit about us. And then we, this past year, started this podcast called Forsaking Faith in order to help us and other people, our listeners, process the deconversion process and everything that entails. And our podcast focuses not so much on the intellectual reasons why someone would leave Christianity, although obviously those things are all really important too, but we focus more on the emotional journey that the deconversion process, all that comes with the deconversion process. And we also talk a lot about how it's really complicated and there are things that we miss about Christian fundamentalism, and so it's a kind of it's empowering to leave the faith, but then there is also a loss involved. So that's the point of our podcast.
Okay, so both can you guys maybe explain very briefly your journey to apostasy?
Sure, Chrissy, do you want to answer that?
No, you
first?
You can't let her do all the talking. See who's in charge in that podcast, obviously.
Okay, so. Right. So I started, it was a long journey for me. I started questioning my faith when I went to graduate school for the first time to get my master's degree, and I was living outside of the United States. And so and that's always a good thing because, you meet different people with different worldviews and you're in a different cultural environment. So I started to question the faith then, but it still took me a while before I really realized I was not a Christian. For a while, I was in this in-between state where I thought, well, it's just a matter of me finding a more liberal church, because part of the problem at this stage was that my politics were moving in a very liberal direction. But for a while I was like, well, so maybe I just need to find a really liberal church, and I just haven't found the right church yet. And then I really, as I got more and more involved in my scholarship, I'm now doing my PhD in English literature. I then started to question in a more fundamental way, reading the Bible as some sort of truth, because what I'm trained to do as a lit scholar is to read text and understand them as cultural products of a specific era, and so that's what I do as a scholar. So that was really the pivotal moment for me when I really decided that I could not believe that this text is anything other than any other text that I study, which is a product of many different writers over different time periods, part of different cultures, different genre conventions that they're writing in, and I still acknowledge that there could be a God, but I do not believe that it's necessarily the Christian God, and I definitely don't believe that the Bible is again any kind of truthful guide.
You just opened up a whole can of worms here. I'm not going to go into it right now because I want Christine to have a chance to give her story as well, but I will bring this back for sure. Christine, by all means, go for it.
Okay, so I've been not a Christian for a million years. Is that too long? Okay. Maybe, I think it's between 11 and 13 years, and so this process for me has been, it's funny because it's been rejuvenated since Heather recently became deconverted. And so for me, I did all this and when I was in college. So I grew up with Heather. We grew up in a Christian school together, like she said. And then I went to school really close to my Christian community, and when I attended the university near our school, I was part of the group on campus that a lot of our it's called BASIC, Brothers and Sisters in Christ. It's a university campus ministries group, basically, and so I was really involved to begin with, and so the thing that sort of took me away was I was actually advertising for one of our events in a classroom. So I stood up in front of 250 people and I said, "Hey, come to our Valentine's Day celebration and let Jesus love you," essentially is what I said. Yeah, right, yeah. No, I had no shame. Still have no shame, but for entirely different things. And so so one of the people that talked frequently in class came up to me and was like, "Hey, let me know how that goes." And I think I did talk to him later after we had the event, and I said, "Oh yeah, it went really well, but whatever." And so we talked from that point on. That he actually turned out to be an atheist, that atheist friend of mine, and we became friends, and he asked me if I ever doubted, and I said that I had, and I think at that moment I realized that I had always doubted, and I was like, wait a minute, I doubt way more than I believe, and I actually have never actually had the feeling or the groundedness that a lot of people have in faith. And so from that point on, my apostasy, kind of grew. It's the wrong thing, right? Anyway, my atheism really stemmed from that. And for a long time, I called myself an agnostic. I still kind of do because of I do think there's a stigma surrounding atheism. So I like to call myself an agnostic now, but I can't deny that I'm, I don't have a God, so I am atheist. Yeah. And so that's sort of how my journey began. And then from there, it was just figuring things out, and now that Heather and I are talking, I talk to her about my experiences often because she's going through a lot of the things that I went through back then. So that's also where the podcast kind of came from.
So you guys got together and decided that was the genesis of the idea of doing a podcast to share your experiences with a broader public.
Well, really, it was several conversations without thinking about the podcast where Heather would be upset about something or thinking about something, and I was just like, well, think about it like this. And she was like, that's really great. I bet there's so many people who I've talked to about this who are negative about their background, and I have sort of this positive outlook on most things. And I think Heather really appreciated that we both embraced our past, and we're also embracing our present. And I think from that, it really stemmed into something where Heather was like, let's share this. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And so it actually didn't start off as like, let's get together and do this podcast. It was more just sort of two friends talking, and then it became two friends talking online, you know?
Yeah. Christine, are you still in New York, or have you traveled as much as Heather has?
Oh, so I live in New Hampshire now. Come find me if you'd like. It's not a small state. It's not a big state, I mean. But, I haven't traveled as much. But, you know, I have my taste of the United States, but it's mostly choosing to travel. I lived in upstate New York for a while before I moved to New Hampshire, and I was I am still a New Yorker. Who am I kidding?
Well, the reason I asked, and I, if you could bring this into the conversation as we go, I think it would be really interesting. In that, you know, Heather has traveled outside the U.S. and she's also been, you know, in several states, and she's been in Canada. And so I wondered whether the outside cultural influences made a difference in her apostasy and how she's come to where she is, or whether or not with you, Christine, it's been more of an internal thing, regardless of the fact that, you know, you've been pretty much in the same areas. So that would be kind of interesting.
This is not the level of question this show is known for, Nancy. You're just setting a new bar here.
That's okay. I guess it's because I realize that these two women are up to it. They're, you know.
Oh, there we go.
I see that. I can tell that they're up
to it. It's all on them now.
Yeah, I mean,
if you read our CV, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a chance to bring that in, you know, fine. If it just is, you know, we leave it open for the next conversation, that'd be great too. But I detect there's a lot going on with you two women, so I thought I'd bring that up as a challenge.
Yeah, I can answer on my end first. That's a great question. And yes, for me, that is absolutely a huge factor, I think, in my deconversion, and also just in my growth as a person. And I am a huge advocate. I've said this many times to myself. If I ever have children, which I'm not sure if I want kids, but if I end up having one, I am going to really promote that they also spend time outside the United States, if I'm still living in the United States, which I might not be, but outside of whatever country it is that they're born in, because that definitely did have a big impact on me. The first time I lived outside the U.S. I was really young too. I was only 17 at the time, and I did a foreign exchange program, and I lived in Brazil for a year before going to college. And then after college, which I did in the United States, then I lived in, and then I got my master's degree in England. So, so I think also traveling, but also living somewhere longer term made a difference, and also living in because Brazil is culturally really different than the UK. And so just seeing, and then also I think moving around in the United States has also helped. I mean, I've just had to learn how to adapt to a lot of different kinds of cultural environments, and what that does is it makes you realize, any kind of traveling or living abroad makes you realize how narrow your cultural, worldview is. And so, that has had a huge impact on a lot of my fundamental beliefs about the world. And again, not just Christianity, but I would say also patriotism, right? I mean, I just don't subscribe to this sort of conservative pro-America ideology, and I think that there's often a connection between the two. Like if you haven't lived anywhere else, then you're going to tend to have a more sort of America is whatever the best country in the world, kind of a American-centric worldview, right? And it really helps when you get out of America to realize that it's an incredibly flawed country, and to want to change. I mean, that's the thing too, is this isn't me just saying screw America, but it's me saying I recognize the flaws and I think we can do better. And I know we can do better because I lived in countries, especially when it comes to healthcare, for example. I've lived in a country that has socialized healthcare, so I know it's better. And I think it's easier to have those beliefs change when you actually get outside of that box. So yes, that's the long answer to your question.
No, this is a very interesting point you're making, because I've noticed even myself, as soon as you travel and you start living outside of where you were born, there's a streak of patriotism that comes. You want to share your culture with whichever new environment you're in, except for the Americans. I've noticed. If you're Dutch and you're sharing, and you come to Canada, you want to talk about Dutch culture and all that, you want to share that. And as a Canadian, I do the same thing. But whenever I come across an American, they don't do that. And the only other person that does that is also a person that's escaping a place like Afghanistan or something like that. I don't know what it is about American culture, but maybe I think you've put a finer point on it. You realize that America is not as great as it thinks it is.
Well, I went to visit Heather when she was in England, and I wouldn't say that we were ashamed of our patriot. It was sort of the interesting topic, but we were fearful, that other people viewed us a certain way because of our actions or our heavy military reliance and some of the other things. We were worried that people might think of us a certain way because of that, Yeah,
I totally understand. I mean, there's been rumors for the longest time that a lot of Americans traveling abroad will sew some Canadian patches on their clothing to try to pass as Canadians so they don't pass as Americans.
Oh, nice. Wow.
I know. It's a wonderful
thing. So Christine, how would you answer the same question that Heather just did?
So I think, and Heather can back me up on this because she's known me for a really long time. I've always been an outsider myself, even in the Christian faith, and so I don't think I needed the culture. I mean, do not get me wrong, I love exploring new cultures and people, but I was always very inquisitive of the differences between people and cultures and what people stood for and their value systems. And so when Heather was, when we knew each other, she had sort of a focused view, and I didn't have that view. I definitely branched out at the time. And so I don't think it changed for me either way. I think when I visit a new place, and I've been to Canada, I've been to Canada and Mexico and England, and I've been places, but I haven't lived in those places. I do think there's a big difference. But I think I have I wouldn't call it innate, but the sense of awareness that maybe Heather didn't have as much. And so I think we've actually come to the same place from two different paths. And Heather, you can let me know if you agree.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's definitely accurate, because you're right. You were always more of an outsider, even in our Christian school, whereas I really subscribed to the ideology of our school and church for a very long time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think if you are looking for that kind of contrast, I might be the wrong person to ask. You know what I mean?
Because you're the right person to ask, because it's your views and your perspectives and your growth and how you were as a child and how you are now. So it's a relevant question, and thanks for answering it.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, it's definitely a relevant question. I just feel like I was kind of a weirdo in the beginning, and so
You think you're a weirdo? Have you met us?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, lady. Going back to your show there, ladies, I was struck by how you said that, because the vast majority of atheist podcasts out there do a lot of focus on the intellectual side of things. You know, the facts, how they apply to the faith, and that's why the faith is wrong. And the fact that you guys are focusing on the emotional journey, I think is pretty fantastic, and I think you might be fairly unique in that sense. So what is it that you hope to bring by focusing on the emotional journey of somebody's apostasy, and do you think it's something that maybe more shows should do as well?
Oh, good question. Do you want to go first, Chrissy?
Yeah, sure, I don't mind.
They weren't expecting good questions from us. They were not.
So I think that I don't think that any show should. I think wherever your passion lies is definitely the direction you should go, right? So blah. But I think Heather and I are especially. She actually says this a lot, that we're both really hypersensitive. In our, to our self-development. And so Heather and I are very hypersensitive people when it comes to evaluating ourselves and our emotions, and sometimes it can be detrimental. But I think that because we're so interested in unraveling what that means for us, that's what drove us toward this specific podcast. And I think that the epistemological, I hope that's the right way to say that, that view of looking at deconversion and Christianity and atheism is fantastic, but it creates this upper level of sort of debateism, which is the word I'm going to make, that doesn't allow for the vulnerability that comes with what happens in a deconversion process. And that sensitivity needs to be dealt with very carefully. And I often see people who deconvert, who jump right into the atheist community and have to defend why they're deconverting, or why they hadn't deconverted sooner, and not even for other people, but for themselves. And you feel like you're lacking so much knowledge and information, and that can be really overwhelming. But Heather and I are taking it deeper to a place that you can actually explore the second that you deconvert. And that's, I think, why I really invested my time in this podcast.
Yeah, and so I completely obviously echo everything Christine is saying, and I also want to add that I think, especially because this is an important point too, Christine and I both, our background is in Christian fundamentalism, and that's very different than growing up in a more sort of nominal Christian background. And so what I mean by that is a lot of people grow up believing that they're Christians and that they vaguely believe what the Bible says, and they go to church regularly. And that's one kind of way of practicing Christianity. But Christian fundamentalism really instills in you this sense, not only that God is real, but that you have a relationship with God. It's an actual, tangible, and for me, and this is not quite the same for Christine, so she can comment after me on her, because it's slightly different. But for me, it was very much colored as a kind of relationship, almost like a romantic relationship. That like God is my first love, God is also my father figure, and it's a very personal, there's a lot of emphasis on that developing that personal relationship, like talking to God and these kinds of things. And so when you deconvert from that kind of background, it's really very devastating at one level, because it's like any kind of going through any kind of bad breakup, or any kind of breakup where you might know that you're making the right decision. Like, I don't want to be with this person anymore. But you still miss, it's still a loss because you're still losing, a relationship. And so that's certainly how I experienced it, and how many people coming from the fundamentalist background experience deconversion. And that's what I really felt like was missing. That's what doesn't come through in the kind of intellectual debates, as Christine was saying. And again, those are also important, and you should be able to articulate also, why, like factually, why you are an atheist. But it's also, there is this emotional level to the journey as well. And we really, both of us really felt like there just wasn't anyone talking about the experience in the way that we're talking about it. And so that was good for us, because we felt like we have a niche that we can contribute with our podcast to help supplement and be in dialogue with all these other there's tons of other great people like you guys, and and other people that are also part of the atheist community who are who also have podcasts and YouTube channels and things like that. And so we felt like we could enhance and contribute to that ongoing dialogue by adding this other layer to bringing this other layer to the conversation.
No, I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and I think this is a fascinating conversation from a point I hadn't really considered before. I've often said, maybe I don't know if you ladies will agree with me, that the relationship that a lot of believers have with Jesus is the same a 16-year-old has with her first boyfriend. He's perfect. He's perfect at first, right? He's always perfect until she's dated him for 3 months, and then he's not so perfect. But you don't get that with Jesus. You don't get to spend 3 months with him, so he's always perfect. So do you find that maybe this is why it's so emotionally devastating to, quote, break up with Jesus, because he's still perfect, right? And then you realize you're the faulty one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer quickly, and then Christine, I think will probably, again, differ from me a little bit in this way. But yeah, for me, that is definitely the case. Yeah, it was very hard because, right, I mean, from my perspective, it was like Jesus is the perfect relationship. I don't even need, and so this is a separate thing that I can talk more about in a minute, but I'll let Christine talk first. But it's just to say, this has also affected my own views of romantic relationships, and I've had to work through a lot of that because I had this sort of distorted view of what relationships were going to be like, assuming it was going to be like my relationship with God. And of course that's not true, because human beings are flawed and complicated. So anyway, yes. So Kevin, that is true of my experience. But then Chrissy, you can answer too, because go ahead.
Let me tell you something, Heather. Let me tell you something, Heather. Jesus ain't that perfect. He stole my wallet the other day. He's not that great.
Really?
Oh yeah, bastard.
Wow. What does he ever use for money? Maybe it's credit cards. Maybe he's just so fascinated with the plastic. I don't know. So If you were going to say, listen, my 16-year-old boyfriend was far better than Jesus, in my opinion. And mostly that was because Jesus didn't talk to me like he talked to Heather. It's really abusive, in my opinion. I asked for, time, attention, communication. Communication is the most important part of a relationship. And Jesus was like, I don't know how to talk to you.
And have you met his mother? His mother's even worse. She's got this Jewish mother thing going on. It's horrible.
But she has great jewelry. So anyway... Yeah, so I didn't feel the same. My relationship with God was very, and I mentioned this actually in one of our podcasts, that it's like a love triangle. I felt like God loved all of my friends, and Jesus loved all my friends but didn't love me, and I was trying so hard to get that attention and that time. So I don't feel the same. As it was kind of easy for me once I realized that I didn't believe in our relationship to be like, peace, bro. So it was very different for me.
I'm not exactly sure what you want me to ask you, Nancy.
I wrote a note to Kevin, and he can't read my writing. Which is,
I can't read.
Yeah, what I was trying to bring out is that in most of the atheist podcasts, they're run by men, and the men approach their apostasy and their journey in a more logical of how the Bible is flawed, and how when you go back to history or the cultural, you find that there are these gaps, and then you get to evolution, and it's all cerebral. Women do tend to go more to the emotional and to the relationship. And so the two of you bring this dimension in, which we all feel, but you are much more equipped to be able to put words to it, where men would say, oh, well, yeah, but, and then they begin to think about it. But then eventually maybe they get to the deeper, this is how I feel about it.
You heard it here first. Nancy said men think. But at the point, I think you bring a very good point, because one of the things that holds a believer to the church is the emotional bond.
Yeah.
And the community, the sense of community the church develops, which is seriously lacking in the atheist community. Yeah. So I think you gals are onto something here.
Yeah, and I hope so. And I also want to, though I appreciate what Nancy said, Nancy, sorry. I actually, the men that I've spoken to when I left deconversion, what did I just say? So the men that I have spoken to since I joined the atheist community, which was just recently because of this podcast, have actually been very aware of their emotions. And actually, Heather and I talk about this in our podcast too. The men in our faith were also very emotionally vulnerable. So even though I recognize what you're saying, Nancy, I don't really like to put as much gender to it as you are. However, I do think you're right in that it's easier for us to introduce a podcast that explores these ideas than it might be for a male to introduce that idea. However, I think that the logicality, is just as fresh in women, and the emotions are just as fresh in men. It's just that we do have some freedom when it comes to breaking out of that, which I don't think men have as much. Even the women that I've talked to who talk more about the logical side have an easier time talking about the logical side than a man might have talking about the emotional side. So I do see some validation in what you're saying, but I have found great emotional, interpersonal, men who really look inside themselves in this deconversion process. One of them being Graceful Atheist, and some of his articles are up on his Twitter. Mm-hmm. And he's a friend of mine who really explores that emotional journey, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, because when I asked the girls if I should open a podcast...
Yeah, well stated. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, when I asked the girls if I should open a second podcast called The Weeping Hour with Kevin, they thought it was a bad idea.
Hey, no, that would be amazing. I can come, bring tissues.
You'll be the reason he cries.
Yeah,
that'll be true. That'll be true.
Make it a YouTube stream instead, because I think that'll get more, just sobbing men. It's just a beautiful thing. There's someone on the side, just a hand that, keeps handing him tissues. I think that'd be beautiful. Let me produce this.
That would be amazing.
Fantastic. Ladies, is there, coming down the pipe there for your show, is there any guests you plan on having, or is there anybody you'd like to have coming on? I mean, besides us, of course. Is there anybody you plan on having coming down on your show to interview? Or you plan on just staying with broad subjects?
Yeah, so Heather, I'm going to take this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have a few more episodes where we're just going to talk about us. And I told Heather, I'm a little exhausted talking about myself. I hate doing that anyway, and so does she, except when we're talking, personally to each other. But and so we're going to move forward. Our next season is going to be exploring alternative ideas from the same topics that we've used in this first season, and it's not coming up for a little while. I think we have 3 or 4 more topics that we're going to deeply discuss, but then we're going to have something called Forsaking Faith snippets, where we just look at alternative ways of looking at these things that we've discussed. And then moving on from there, our 3rd season, look at us planners. Oh, yeah. We're planning on bringing interviews in where we look at the Christian side versus the deconverted side. and we ask questions to both Christians and deconverts, and compare and contrast sort of how they think. Because I think there's this huge hole, that leap that you take away from faith, it has this like terrible do not cross police tape cliff between it. So once you like leap over that tape, it's hard to see the people on the other side. And I think we're more alike than we play it out to be. You know, atheists can sometimes be really harsh to Christians. Christians can be very harsh to atheists, and or anti-theists, however you see yourself. And bridging that gap is really important to encourage educational and intelligent discussion. And I think when you bring these debates up to the intellectual level or the logical level, you can sometimes create an impasse. Whereas when you bring it to the level that Heather and I are, where you're looking at the emotional journey, I think that opens it better up to intercommunication between the communities, you know?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I mean, that even so far, certainly in my personal experience, some of my relationships with Christian friends of mine have improved as a result of this podcast, because I have a few friends who are still Christians who listen to our podcast, and then they will my one friend will call me, you know, and want to talk about whatever, you know, whatever it is that we brought up. And yeah, like exactly like Christine was saying, because we can connect and have this common ground at the emotional level, then we can really connect in a way that I don't necessarily know that we could if we were debating sort of like theology or
exactly.
Exactly.
Right, and I just to make the longest answer ever short, yes, we will have people interviewing, but that will be 2 seasons away because Heather is finishing her thesis.
I'm finishing my PhD this year, so it's a little crazy.
So we're waiting until she's done to do those interviews.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You guys are giving me an idea. Heather, Christine, we have to bring you back on, because especially since, Heather, you're doing your PhD in literature, we have to bring you back on, and we'll do a show called "Is the Bible Actually Good Literature?"
That sounds like
because
fantastic.
I hear that all the time. So, oh well, it might not be good, but it's good in literature class. Really, I don't think so. But I want the opinion of an expert. So you two ladies we're booking you guys for another show, probably in the new year. So
sounds
we'll do that.
good.
So
sounds great.
If the show is Forsaking Faith, if people want to find you guys, where can they reach you?
Okay, so you can reach us on Twitter. We're at Forsaking Faith, and then also we have a Gmail account, which is forsakingfaith@gmail.com, and we have a Facebook page, Forsaking Faith. So you can contact us on any of those platforms, and we really enjoy getting feedback and from everyone. And our podcast is available on all the major platforms, so iTunes, Spotify, and also for people who are listening, we appreciate feedback just generally. Like sometimes we have people message us about it, asking our advice as they're deconverting, but also if you have specific feedback about our podcast, we also really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And also if you wouldn't mind leaving a review about our podcast, that really helps people, other people find it and things like that. So Christine, did I miss anything?
Yeah, right. Because we have like 50 listeners right now. Like good.
Hey, that's like 39 more than we have.
Oh, awesome. No, he's lying. But so we would like, it's really about reaching people who are going through the same process. So if you know anybody who would be interested in the podcast, I'd rather word of mouth, just be like, yo, listen to these girls. They're like talking about themselves, but the stuff they say is kind of relevant to you. So yeah, no, Heather didn't leave anything out. Just that we really like when people record like some of their deconversion story on their phone, so we can put it in the beginning of our podcast. We love to have people be a part of it. As a matter of fact, many of the people we've talked to have given us like songs to put at the end or poems or things like that. And so we really like to be interactive with our listeners. So anybody who wants to give us something, a poem that they've written or a song that they've wrote, would be great, and we'd love to showcase it. So there's also that.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Heather, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today. But before I let you go, I gotta have you say, hi, this is Heather and Christine from Forsaking Faith, and we took a left at the valley.
All right. Hello, this is Christine.
Hello, this is Heather.
And we took a left at the valley.
Fantastic.
And we... Oh, should I say it too? No, sorry.
Sure. And that was Heather and Christine of Forsaking Faith.
That was great.
Lovely ladies.
Yeah.
I love them.
We really don't get into that level of emotion and
No.
that aspect of it.
It really is a subject that we don't talk about enough.
We tend to get more to the scientific and the
science,
logical,
the data, the intellectual, and I think they're really onto something there.
Mhm.
Because, like I said, a lot of Christians, the thing that holds them to the church, even though they know what the church is doing, but they have this emotional excuse of saying, well, it helps me. It's my little safe place. It's an emotional response.
Yeah.
And if these ladies can make you see that the journey to apostasy does have an emotional journey, but not necessarily one that's you're not necessarily giving up the emotional side of your life, then I think they're doing us a great favor.
Yeah, I like the way their first season is structured around their own experiences and journey, and now they're going to branch out and bring other people in as part of their podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really wonderful way to transition into different ways of looking at apostasy.
So the show is Forsaking Faith. I recommend you watch it. You listen to it. It's a great little show, and you follow that. It's a good one. Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today on the show, guys, and thank you for listening. You can follow us at leftatthevalley.com. You can follow us at Facebook, on Twitter at LATV Podcast. You can send us an email at leftatvalley@outlook.com. You can send your complaints to Nancy on the 3rd floor.
Except if it's raining and then it's indoors.
Coming up next week, our old friend Robert Stanley returns. Oh, it'll be a wacky one yet again.
Do we have a subject we're talking about, or is it kind of just a free-for-all?
Even if we did, Robert's just going to go into a field somewhere, and we'll just have to follow him. That's all there is to it.
Chasing him through the field.
He's in Temple, Texas. He can go in any direction he wants.
Coming up in October, we'll have our old friend David Fitzgerald. He'll be coming back to talk to us about John the Baptist and the history of John the Baptist. On the 13th, we'll have Mr. Dini. Brian Keith Dalton returns. He's much more deep in political things than you would think. If you watch, yes, he's actually very good. And on the 20th, this is going to be a first, we're having an atheist heavy metal group.
What?
Called Predators.
What?
And they're coming to the show. We've had some singers before, usually most folk song, but these are heavy metal guys.
I'm so excited.
This is going to be great. This is going to be great. And of course, on the 27th, we have our Halloween special.
Woo-hoo.
So we have to be getting ready for that. Perfect. That's what we got coming up, guys.
Excited.
Sounds great, yeah.
That's what a great month of October planned. Anything else we need to say?
Nope.
Perfect. So
We're good to go.
have a great week. Until next time.
It comes from culture, only true on a regional scale. Science is universal. For you to say that Horus isn't real.
A vice. Except for America for Canada.
The White Walkers are actually people from Alberta.
There's just like a sheet over it, so when Americans look at it, they don't notice it's there.
You want to hear a funny story? When I used to drive a truck down south to California, one summer, this is July, and for some reason it's always a Texan. I don't know what it is about Texans. It's always a freaking Texan.
Their education system's not great.
And he's coming across to Canada. This is in the middle of July, and this guy's he's wearing a toque. and he's got skis on the roof. And he rolls down his window. He's waving at me, so I roll down mine. And he says, "Excuse me, sir." He says, "Can you direct me to the mountains?" This is July. I said, "The mountains? You going skiing?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, okay." This was Highway 15. So I said, "Well, just follow this road north for a couple of miles, and then you hit Highway 1." I said, "Head west and follow that road for about 3 hours, then wait 3 months." This guy apparently expected as soon as he would cross into Canada, there'd be a wall of snow there just waiting.
Oh, yeah. And we all live in igloos up there for sure.
It's always a Texan. Like, what it is about Texans? I don't know what it is about Texans.
Texans are crazy. Yeah.
Oh
no! I hope. I hope don't broadcast that part.
That many atheists are told to be quiet. You're not alone. Speak your mind. Time to let it be known. I'm proud to be an atheist, a skeptic, a non-believer, an infidel, a heathen. I call it how I see it. I say it's ignorance, and you just call it faith. And unsubstantiated claims. That's something to be ashamed.